The night Ethan Harper disappeared, the only thing police found on the porch was a half-empty suitcase, a broken camera lens, and a wet set of footprints leading toward the woods behind the cabin. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just silence. And for almost 9 years, nobody could explain why a man who spent his entire life documenting dangerous places suddenly vanished during what was supposed to be a peaceful vacation in the mountains of North Carolina. But what investigators discovered weeks later would completely change the story people thought they understood. Because Ethan didn't just disappear. Someone had been watching that cabin long before he arrived, and according to the final recording recovered from his camera, Ethan realized that far too late. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ethan Harper was the kind of person most people trusted immediately. 46 years old, calm voice, former travel photographer, recently divorced, and known among friends as someone who hated drama. He lived alone outside Columbus, Ohio, and spent most weekends driving through small American towns, taking photos of abandoned places, hiking trails, and quiet roadside diners most people ignored. He wasn't famous online, but he had a loyal audience that followed his long-form travel videos because they felt honest, no fake reactions, no exaggerated stories, just a man driving across America trying to escape the noise of normal life. In October of 2016, Ethan booked a week-long stay at an isolated rental cabin near Black Ridge, North Carolina. The cabin sat several miles away from the nearest gas station, surrounded by thick woods and old mountain roads that locals rarely used after dark. According to the owner, the property had been rented dozens of times before without issue. Hunters used it during deer season. Couples used it for quiet weekends. Nothing unusual had ever been officially reported there, but Ethan's trip would become the last confirmed place anyone ever saw him alive. Friends later said Ethan had been exhausted before leaving. His divorce had finalized just months earlier, and while he rarely talked openly about it, people close to him noticed changes. He stopped answering calls as often. He posted less online. One friend described him as physically present but mentally somewhere else. The vacation wasn't supposed to be an adventure, it was supposed to be an escape. Ethan arrived at the cabin just after sunset on a Thursday evening. Security footage from a nearby convenience store captured him buying coffee, batteries, and canned soup around 7:40 p.m. Witnesses remembered him because he asked whether the roads became dangerous at night. One employee jokingly told him the mountains were quieter than the cemetery. Ethan laughed, paid, and drove away. That would become one of the last normal moments in the entire case. According to phone records, Ethan contacted his sister around 9:12 p.m. that same night. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. He told her the cabin looked exactly like the photos online and mentioned hearing strange animal noises outside already. She later recalled him sounding relaxed, even happy. But near the end of the call, Ethan reportedly paused mid-sentence and asked, "Wait, hold on." After several seconds of silence, he said he thought somebody had walked past one of the windows outside. At first, his sister assumed he was joking. Ethan laughed afterward and brushed it off. Probably a deer, maybe a raccoon. The call ended normally, but investigators later became obsessed with that moment, because less than 2 hours later, Ethan uploaded a short 20-second clip to his private cloud storage account. The video itself showed almost nothing. A dark porch, wind moving through trees, rain beginning to fall. But near the end of the clip, there was a sound that analysts struggled to explain, very faint, very distant. A woman's voice, at least that's what some people believed. Others insisted it was only the wind. The recording spread online years later, dividing listeners completely. Some heard whispering, others heard nothing at all. But detectives focused on something else entirely. At exactly 16 seconds into the video, a shadow briefly moved across the far side of the porch railing. And Ethan never acknowledged it once. The next morning, Ethan drove into town for breakfast. Surveillance cameras captured him sitting alone at a diner reading from a folded tourist map while drinking coffee. Employees later said he appeared distracted, tired. One waitress remembered him asking whether people lived year-round in the cabins near Black Ridge or only during tourist season. When she answered that some homes stayed empty most of the year, Ethan reportedly became quiet. Then he asked something strange. "Has anyone ever complained about someone walking around those woods at night?" The waitress said no immediately, but another employee overheard the conversation and later told investigators there had always been rumors about hikers hearing voices in the mountains after dark. Nothing criminal, mostly local ghost stories passed around to scare tourists. Ethan laughed again when he heard that, but he stopped smiling shortly afterward. Later that afternoon, Ethan uploaded several photos from nearby trails, trees covered in fog, empty roads, a wooden bridge crossing a creek. Nothing unusual appeared in any of them until investigators examined the metadata weeks later. In the background of one image, partially hidden between trees nearly 50 yards away, stood what appeared to be a person wearing dark clothing. The figure was facing directly toward Ethan. At first glance, it looked accidental. But in every enlarged version of the image, one detail stood out immediately. The person appeared to be smiling. Nobody could identify who it was, and Ethan never mentioned seeing anyone nearby. By the third night, things became harder to explain. Phone records showed Ethan attempted 3 outgoing calls after midnight, all unsuccessful, due to weak signal coverage. Around 1:14 a.m., he sent a voice message to his friend Daniel Reed back in Ohio. The message was short, shaky, and noticeably different from Ethan's usual calm personality. "Somebody keeps walking around outside." There was silence for several seconds before Ethan spoke again. "I thought it was an animal yesterday, but now I know it isn't." Daniel didn't hear the message until morning. By then, Ethan was already gone. Investigators later reconstructed Ethan's final known timeline using recovered camera footage, phone data, and nearby road surveillance. Around 2:03 a.m., motion sensors inside the cabin activated repeatedly. First near the kitchen, then the hallway, then near the front entrance. Some investigators believed Ethan was pacing nervously through the cabin, checking windows and doors. Others believed something else triggered the sensors entirely. At 2:11 a.m., Ethan's camera began recording again. The footage was never released publicly in full, but transcripts from investigators described portions of it in disturbing detail. Ethan could reportedly be heard whispering while moving through the cabin with a flashlight. Several times he paused near windows. Once he muttered, "I know you're there." Then, near the 7-minute mark of the recording, the camera briefly captured someone standing near the tree line outside. Still, watching, the figure disappeared seconds later. Ethan locked the front door immediately afterward. What happened next remains one of the most argued parts of the case. At approximately 2:26 a.m., neighbors nearly half a mile away reported hearing what sounded like a single scream carried through the woods during heavy rain. None of them contacted police at the time. One resident later admitted they assumed it was an animal. Another said screams occasionally echoed strangely through the mountains at night. By morning, Ethan's rental car remained parked outside the cabin. The front door was open, the lights inside were still on, and Ethan Harper was nowhere to be found. Police arrived around noon after the cabin owner became concerned that Ethan had stopped responding to messages and missed checkout instructions. Inside the cabin, investigators found Ethan's wallet, keys, laptop, and most of his belongings untouched. His camera sat overturned near the hallway. One lens had shattered against the floor. Muddy footprints appeared near the back entrance, though heavy rain made analysis nearly impossible. What frightened investigators most was the condition of the bedroom. The mattress had been partially dragged away from the wall, and behind it, carved directly into the wooden paneling, were 4 words: "You should not stay." No fingerprints were recovered. Police initially believed Ethan may have suffered a mental health episode and wandered into the woods during severe weather. Search teams spent 12 days combing nearby trails, rivers, and abandoned structures. Helicopters scanned miles of terrain. Nothing appeared. Then the story changed again. On the 13th day of the investigation, a hunter discovered Ethan's backpack nearly 6 miles away, inside an abandoned ranger station deep in the forest. Inside were batteries, a flashlight, wet clothing, and Ethan's camera memory cards sealed carefully inside plastic wrapping. Investigators immediately focused on one terrifying question. if Ethan disappeared during a storm in unfamiliar woods? Who protected those memory cards so carefully? The recovered footage became the center of the entire investigation. Hours of harmless recordings filled most of the files. Hiking clips, rainstorms, wildlife. But the final video lasted only 3 minutes and 41 seconds. And according to detectives present during viewing, nobody in the room spoke for several minutes after it ended. The footage began with Ethan breathing heavily while walking through trees in darkness. Rain struck the camera lens repeatedly as he whispered directions to himself, clearly disoriented. At one point, he turned the camera briefly toward his face. He looked terrified. Mud covered his hoodie. His hands shook violently. Then Ethan stopped walking because somewhere ahead of him a light appeared between the trees. The camera zoomed slowly. A cabin, not the one he rented. This cabin appeared abandoned, old, partially collapsing from age. One dim yellow light glowed through a single window. Ethan whispered something investigators struggled to fully understand. "I think this is where they went." Then the footage cut briefly. When the video resumed, Ethan stood inside the abandoned structure. Dust covered the floor. Old furniture lined the walls beneath white sheets. Rain leaked through holes in the ceiling. Ethan moved slowly, room by room, until he reached what appeared to be a basement staircase. That was when the sound started. Footsteps. Not Ethan's. Someone else moving below him. The camera shook violently as Ethan backed away. Then a voice echoed faintly from downstairs. A woman's voice. "Help me!" Investigators later confirmed the voice was present on recording, but no missing persons connected to the area were ever identified. Ethan descended halfway down the stairs before stopping suddenly. The camera tilted toward the darkness below. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then a face appeared, not clearly, not long enough for identification, just pale skin, wide eyes, and what investigators described as an unnatural smile. Ethan screamed. The footage ended instantly afterward. No further recordings were ever recovered. The abandoned cabin shown in the footage was eventually identified nearly 20 miles from Ethan's rental property. But when police searched the location, they found it completely empty. No footprints. No evidence Ethan had ever been there. No basement. That detail alone caused years of controversy, because the basement staircase, visible in Ethan's footage, did not exist inside the real structure anymore. Records later revealed it had collapsed almost 15 years earlier. Online theories exploded afterward. Some believed Ethan staged the entire disappearance intentionally. Others believed he encountered squatters living in the woods who frightened him into fleeing deeper into the mountains. But one retired investigator publicly admitted something years later that unsettled people even more. The face appearing at the end of Ethan's final recording resembled someone connected to another unsolved disappearance from 1998, a woman named Claire Donovan. Claire vanished less than 30 miles from Blackridge after reporting someone standing outside her vacation cabin night after night. Her body was never found. Neither was Ethan Harper's. Over time, the case slowly faded from national attention. Ethan's family stopped giving interviews. The rental cabin near Blackridge was eventually demolished after repeated trespassing incidents from curiosity seekers and online ghost hunters. Local residents still avoid discussing the story openly, especially older people who grew up near those woods. Some claim there were always stories about isolated cabins attracting strange encounters. Others insist fear simply caused Ethan to imagine things that weren't there. But there's one detail nobody has ever explained. 3 months after Ethan vanished, a couple hiking near Blackridge reported finding an old camera hanging from a tree branch nearly 2 miles from the abandoned ranger station. Police examined it carefully. The memory card inside contained only one photo, a nighttime image of Ethan standing outside his rental cabin. The picture had clearly been taken from deep within the woods, and Ethan himself appeared completely unaware someone was watching him. To this day, investigators still don't know who took that photograph. Maybe Ethan crossed paths with someone dangerous hiding in those mountains. Maybe isolation and fear distorted what he thought he saw. Or maybe there are places where people notice things they were never supposed to notice in the first place. Places where being watched feels less like paranoia and more like a warning arriving too late. Because the truth is, fear changes people. Once someone believes they're being followed, every shadow becomes a person, every noise becomes movement, every empty doorway feels occupied. And sometimes the mind creates monsters to explain what it cannot understand. But sometimes the monster is real. If you were alone in that cabin, hearing footsteps, would you have stayed long enough to find out who's watching you?